This week, I was reminded of an experience I had more than 25 years ago. We were in Florence. It was Shabbat. We went to shul. Directed to my seat as I climbed the narrow staircase, I admired the walls, which were adorned by that distinctive, marbleized, handcrafted paper for which the city is known. And from my place behind the ornate iron railing that served to further separate the obstructed view from the balcony from the worshiping congregation below, I could hear familiar words: Shema, Amidah, Torah, Kaddish. And while the melodies were different, the words created a shared bond through liturgy. And yet I felt like I was visiting another time. It wasn't simply the Florentine minhag, the tradition, but I had a persistent feeling of being in a place where time stood still, when women were relegated to a place hidden from male view, lest the men become distracted from their prayers, a time when one of the essential requirements to lead a community was being male. And I have to say that it felt odd. And this memory came flooding back as news of the week flooded the airwaves. Along with all of the recent Supreme Court rulings this week, this is also the 50th anniversary of Title IX, a landmark gender equity law which leveled the playing field for women. For girls who grow up playing sports, research shows that they benefit in intangible ways from becoming more assertive, an attribute which some deem pejorative, to being more likely to create a successful path for themselves, to delaying sexual activity until they are older. Shaped by challenges, learning about teamwork, navigating losses, and celebrating successes, becoming overall more confident in the physical space that they occupy, just like boys have always done. What wonderful guidance and preparation for a world that was ready to welcome women into the workforce on an equal footing, a development that was only possible because of the concurrent right that Roe gave women to control their own reproductive choices. After 50 years of Title IX and making a place for oneself, after 50 years of bodily autonomy, rolling back rights makes a mockery of agency, dominion over oneself, which is exactly what is at play now. You may well be tired of hearing this now famous quote by Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which she made in her confirmation hearings. She said the decision whether or not to bear a child is central to a woman's life, to her well-being and dignity. When government controls that decision for her, she is being treated as less than a fully adult human, responsible for her own choices. And we also know that not being able to plan a pregnancy is more than simply disruptive, it is denigrating. Ever since women entered the workforce, they risked being fired once they became pregnant. Others were not even hired because there was a possibility that they could become pregnant. And for so many, having a child unexpectedly can change a career path, whether it is finishing school or having to give up scholarships, or forsaking one's own goals to provide care instead. Raising a child is an additional expense, which can push a woman who is living at the edge of her earning power into poverty. It can complicate family dynamics in countless ways, including shaming the woman for becoming pregnant. I want to lift up a lesson which Rabbi Leah Berkowitz recently wrote about, a lesson about agency seen through the example of Yom Kippur. While the expectation, of course, is to fast on Yom Kippur, there are instances in which someone cannot, likely due to illness. Rabbi Berkowitz framed the issue. The rabbis recognize that we do not always live in an ideal world, and that human beings each have different needs. So if a person is ill and fasting would make things worse, that person is commanded to eat. Because things can never be quite this simple for the rabbis, they break this down even further. Who gets to decide if the sick person eats? At first they say that it is at the advice of medical experts, and this is especially true if the sick person refuses to eat, putting themselves in danger. But what if the situation is reversed and the sick individual says they need to eat, and the medical expert says it's not necessary? Well, here Rabbi Berkowitz draws upon our tradition. Rabbi Yanai said, if an ill person says they need to eat and a doctor says they don't, one listens to the ill person. And what is the reason for this ruling? It's because of the verse which says, the heart knows the bitterness of the soul, meaning an ill person alone knows the intensity of their pain and weakness, and doctors cannot say otherwise. Her voice overrides even a medical opinion, and in that instance, only the woman fully knows her body and the extent of its needs. She is the one who gets to decide. For the first time in half a century, we have to ask, who decides for me? Suddenly, the government has stepped unsolicited over the line drawn by the 14th Amendment, which includes privacy, uninvited. Why should I or any woman who has responsibly exercised her rights have them suddenly stripped away by an odious gang who has no respect for a woman's personhood? When Justice Ginsburg spoke about dignity, that quality was not even on this court's docket. Elsewhere in the Talmud, we learn that human dignity is so important that it supersedes even a biblical prohibition, which really means that if one is required to fulfill a religious obligation, but doing so conflicts with someone else's dignity, then the mitzvah can wait. The person's honor takes precedence. What has become evident that in this Supreme Court ruling, it is devoid of dignity and is unapologetically about promoting a religious agenda, a doctrine to which Jews do not subscribe. Abortion is a Jewish value. Our tradition affirms it and in some cases even requires it if the health of the person carrying the fetus is in danger. It would be helpful to step back for a moment to understand the court's thinking, which is based in originalism. They ascribe to the framers, who were indeed brilliant, the gift of anticipating future developments. If it cannot be found in the Constitution, they reasoned, then subsequent laws are simply unfounded developments. Using that logic, abortion, this court asserts, is not in the Constitution. And of course, it is germane to note that women are not mentioned either, which makes the absence of abortion unsurprising. Contrast this method to Jewish law, which builds upon the words and rulings of successive generations, creating an intergenerational legal conversation. A ruling is never repealed in Jewish law. It is simply expanded to allow for other interpretations. By maintaining minority opinions, Judaism celebrates diverse rulings so that future generations can benefit from the exchange of earlier scholars. In this way, the rabbis actually did have some knowledge of the future when they recognized that what was appropriate for one time period might not suit generations to follow. And Jewish law continues to evolve today because all of our codes are living documents. In one captivating Talmudic example, the sage Abaye determines which of two contradictory teachings is authoritative by directing his students, saying, "Go and see what the people are doing." This is not legal theorizing, as Justice Alito would have it. Abaye teaches us that there is a lived experience that justice cannot dismiss as irrelevant, a reality that the Dobbs decision ignores. And that is 1 in 4 pregnancies end in abortion. The Guttmacher Institute notes that making abortion illegal does not eliminate the procedure, it only makes it unsafe and inaccessible. So yes, go and see what the people are doing. 50 years after women have been granted bodily autonomy and self-determination, we have created lives that celebrate and depend on that right. Let that evolution be a guide to justice. So now come back to Florence with me, many years after that first visit. When I arrived on another hot summer Shabbat morning, I remembered where to go. I expected to make the climb up to the women's gallery, but instead, I was directed to a section of pews on the main floor, where women no longer had to observe the service from afar, but now had a place adjacent to the men. And that worship experience felt entirely different. After the service concluded, I did ask what had happened in those intervening years which led to such a remarkable change. I received multiple answers. The first should have been obvious. The congregation was aging, and the nonas, the grandmas, simply couldn't manage the stairs any longer. Another more satisfying response was that the decision was reflective of the times. In every other aspect of their lives, Italian women had become part of the secular community in important and significant ways. This change, to pray on the same level as their husbands, sons, fathers, and brothers, reflected that recognition, an evolution of practice and custom. So much changed for the Florentine community in the space of a generation. And even more has changed for American women in the span of a single day with the reversal of Roe. The New York Times editorial board said it simply, "Without full control over their bodies, women will lose their ability to function as equal members of American society." Now listen to the centuries-old commentary, Esther Rabbah, written and preserved by our sages in the years when all of them were men. This was their counsel to Queen Esther. If you, Esther, are silent now and refrain from advocating on behalf of your nation, ultimately you will be silent in the future, and you will have no claim. Why? Because you have the opportunity to perform good during your life, and you will have failed to do so. Let those words be a call to us, to men as well as women, to speak out, to advocate, until the question of agency is answered resoundingly, that women have the right to self-determination and dominion over our own bodies for the sake of privacy, for the sake of equality in this land of liberty. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may it be so.